Hello, guys. It's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zicree of Space Command. And here we are in the Zicree Mansion, and and we are ready to talk science fiction, Hollywood, whatever you guys want to talk. Additionally, we're running our Kickstarter campaign right now, and it's now up and live, and we need to hit 20,000 the next day or so. So if you've been wanting to buy Space Command shares, they will apply to that amount. If you want a walk-on role or a number of other cool things, I also am just releasing a new book about my mom, a memoir I've written. So her 100th birthday would have been this past Saturday. So it's in memorial of that I'm putting that book out. Um, I'll just talk for a little while about what we're up to, and eventually some of you will come aboard and then be asking me questions, and that's always fun. I always love talking to the Mr. Sci-Fi community, and maybe I'll pull some things out that are like in close reach and just share with you some of the little weird items I have in my office. But the basic overview of everything right now is we have finished shooting Space Command Forgiveness. We just have some creature stuff to shoot, some CG stuff, and we're actively making special effects shots, VFX shots. We're actively writing the production draft for Great Solar War to jump in and shoot that very soon, and then after that, Empire and Harvester, and that will be the season. Additionally, we have been in conversation with two major distributors, and both want Space Command, and we can get into that a little bit. So if you have been wanting to buy Space Command shares, now is the time, because once we, have an active distributor, we will not be selling shares anymore. So just a word to the wise. And but the cool part now is it's almost like you get double points, because if you buy a share in Space Command for $7,500, we'll then put that into the Kickstarter campaign to help us hit some of the goals we have, and you can get $7,500 worth of Space Command perks as well. So that's a pretty good deal, guys. I wouldn't sneeze on that, or if you want to sneeze on it, you can, but that's your choice. It's flu season after all. But so let me just talk a little about Space Command, about what we're doing, about where we're headed. Now, as you know, or maybe you don't know, I'm a writer, producer, director. I've done hundreds of hours of network TV. I wrote The Twilight Zone Companion, hence the Rod Serling bust behind me, and have written for many iconic shows. And then recently I wanted to do Space Command. I wanted to do a show that would inspire and that would have characters you care about, and would be give a hopeful vision of the future, just like Star Trek did, just like Twilight Zone. Rod Serling was not a cynic. He was very optimistic, hopeful, let's say hopeful about the future. And so it was just great. And you know, beyond that, we're very driven to get the first season of Space Command done. We're very proud of what we've put together, and then it's on to 5 more series that we'll be doing, plus features, plus all sorts of stuff. So it's a very bright future for us here at Space Command Studios, and really love to share all of that with you guys. But for now, I'm just hoping that people will hear about Mr. Sci-Fi. We're very close to very close to hitting 100,000 subscribers. So please tell your friends. Please subscribe if you haven't, because that's how we get where we're going. And so. And please ask any questions you have of anything relating to science fiction, fantasy, horror, writing for TV, writing for movies, writing books, The Twilight Zone Companion, Smurfs, He-Man, Super Friends, Real Ghostbusters, any of the shows I've written for. I'm happy to answer questions about any of that stuff. And then, meantime, I can talk about what we're up to, what we're doing. It's very wonderful to have your own studio, by the way. When I was 10, I got to see the Star Trek sets when that show was just ending, the original Star Trek. I was there for the last episode they ever shot. A week later, and there would have been no Star Trek. I would have gone to, I assume they struck those sets, and there would have just been sound stages. But I was very lucky, and I'm very grateful. So beyond that, we're setting up stage 2 of our 3 stages, sound stages, to essentially be a museum of some of the items that we've put together, because we've bought a lot of spacesuits and spaceship consoles and so forth to repurpose for Space Command. But it's also really fun to see them in person. Spacesuits from Outland and Alien. Aliens, and I just got a little neck piece from Armageddon, and on and on and on. Just it's I think we've got around 30 spacesuits now, and spaceship consoles from all sorts of movies and TV shows, and it's just super cool what you can find if you just kind of go looking, and I'm very very pleased to share it with you. So anytime, our investors and a lot of our fans, they get to come to the Space Command studios. They get to see all this cool stuff. For instance, we're going to be having a Space Command New Year's party for our cast and crew and investors and table members and so forth, and we basically open up the studio for a party, and it's super fun. So if you've wanted to be part of that world, you can either pledge at the Kickstarter campaign or buy shares for 7,500 bucks each, and then you get a portion of my producer's net profits, which no guarantees, but it's looking really good right now. And I'm very, very happy with the fact that when we met with these two distributors, they both want the show. One wants to start distributing the first 2 hours immediately. The other wants to wait until we have the full season done. But we can basically work with both of those eventualities. So it really works out very well for us. Let's see. And now, are there any let's see. Someone says, "I like your Twilight Zone book." Yeah, me too. And it was great fun writing it. I started it right out of college. I was 21 years old, just gotten married to Elaine, who I'm still married to, thank God. And I was a big fan of the Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone and Star Trek and Outer Limits were the three shows that made me want to be a writer. And I'd grown up knowing I would either be a writer or a visual artist, and I actually got my degree at UCLA in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts. I had gallery shows when I was a teenager. I have a very strong visual sense, and that's helped me a lot with Space Command. But by the time I sold my first short story at 19, I knew I wanted to be a full-time writer, particularly in television, because I'd read the making of Star Trek and thought, well, I'd like to do that. So, so I started writing the Twilight Zone book, both out of an interest, but also out of the fact that there was no way to learn how to be a writer producer in television. There were no classes in that, and so I thought, well, why don't I study one of the greatest shows ever made, and I'll learn. And I'd met George Clayton Johnson, the great Twilight Zone writer of Kick the Can and Nothing in the Dark, and he wrote The Man Trap for Star Trek. Wonderful writer, and he was my way into interviewing the people who worked on Twilight Zone. And Carol Serling, Rod's widow, gave me full access to everything. The house was exactly as Rod had left it. And it was just an amazing and invaluable experience. And I'm very, very glad I did it. The book came out. It sold over 500,000 copies. It's still in print. And I'm very, very proud of it. So let's see. Mountains of Elysium says, oh, wait. Odd Events says, found your channel about a year ago. Love it. To keep in line with Halloween, what is your favorite recommendation for a Dracula space sci-fi movie? Huh. Well, of space vampires, which is called Life. God, it's this awful movie, but it's really interesting. The book was called Space Vampires. It was by Colin Wilson, and the movie's called Life Something, and it was directed by Toby Hooper, who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's a lot of fun. It's like a guilty pleasure. It's really weird, and my favorite science fiction horror movie, of course, is Alien, the great, 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 and I love that John Carpenter's The Thing. These are all wonderful. Mountains of Elysium says, I wish I could help you financially, but I have close to zero in funds. My son is due to be born next week. Congratulations. I saw the pilot you released and I loved what I saw. I wish you massive success. Well, thank you. And just to those who can't afford to help us financially, it's, every little bit of encouragement is enormously valuable. People often think that we are, these enormously confident gods of Olympus, we who create television, but often just a word or two can mean worlds to us and really help us keep going. So yeah, Toby Hooper, that's right. And it's really meaningful to have people be supportive and like what we're doing. And I think when you see the next 2 hours, Space Command Forgiveness, you're going to love it as much as you love the first 2 hours, because we have the great part is that it continues and expands the story, but it also tells a completely different story than the first 2 hours. We're not just repeating ourselves, and it has all of our cast and crew and everyone you've come to love. But it tells its own story, as does Great Solar War, as does Empire, as does Harvester, the ones that are coming. And so yeah, and I was going to say coming down the pike, but we actually have Captain Pike in Space Command now. Sean Kenny, who played Captain Pike in the wheelchair in the Menagerie, boop. So and that's really really fun. So I love working with people whom I've admired since I was a child, and it's just a dream come true to be working with all these great great people. I'm part of a family, and that's really really nice. So and beyond that, we're getting ready to shoot Great Solar War. We're getting all the spaceship consoles up and running, and they look just gorgeous. They're so cool. And we're going to have a contest soon for people who can do spaceship graphics, like the screens that show, various interesting things on a spaceship. And everyone who enters will actually get credited on on the show. So I'll be announcing that very very shortly. And if you like to do spaceship graphics, and you have to own it outright. You have to let us use it with no strings, but it'll show up on screen. It'll be really cool looking. So and but happy to answer anything anyone wants to know. I can show you some cool things just on here on my shelf near at hand. Like for instance, this is a little figure from Tom Corbett's Space Cadet, which is one of the two great kids science fiction shows of the early 50s. There was Space Tom Corbett's Space Cadet, which is not based on the Heinlein book called Space Cadet, but they acquired the title. And this is, of course, from Space Patrol, which is my favorite of the two, and that's Ed Kemmer, who played Commander Buzz Corey. And Captain Kemmer in Space Command is named after him. And I met him. I got to have lunch with him before his passing, and that was really wonderful. Ann Daly asks, The Outer Limits or Twilight Zone? Can you recommend a really scary story for Halloween, please? Ooh, that's really interesting. Um, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet on Twilight Zone with William Shatner is great. What else is really scary? The After Hours is kind of spooky. That's another Twilight Zone episode. Howling Man is fun. Outer Limits, there's Form of Things Unknown, which is great with David McCallum. So those are a couple that come just off the top of my head. But there's many, many, many more. Some people might like The Invaders with Agnes Moorehead, which is a Twilight Zone episode. Let me think what else is good. Well, those are some just to start with, but both are terrific shows. And it's the black and white versions. Never be fooled by the later versions that are not nearly as good. Odd Events says favorite Space Command set clip so far. Did you touch that? Yes, yes, I did. Yeah, that's really fun, and it's fun because that was actually not in the script. That was basically just they Brian McClure and Victor Manso came on up with that on the set. They say, well, how about we do this, and it's like great, sounds great, and very very funny because people in science fiction movies are always touching things, and sometimes it has a terrible consequence, like an Alien with John Hurt and the egg. And then other times it's just kind of like, well, we'll take off our helmets and see if the air is breathable. Just good luck with that one. I would love sometime to see them take off their helmets and say, well, the air must be breathable, and then like just asphyxiate immediately. I think that would be terrific. But we found what you do when you're see, this is why I love to collaborate with actors. Some producers hate actors, and they and I think it's such a mistake, because actors, if you don't have great actors, you're not going to have a great show. There's just no two ways about it. It doesn't matter how good the script is if the actors can't deliver it. And so I view them as my partners. And when they have ideas, when they have suggestions, I will absolutely listen to those and take those very, very seriously. And sometimes they'll work and sometimes they won't, but it's worth a try. And what you discover also is that certain actors have a real chemistry, and often you can't tell until you actually get them in a scene together. And it just turned out that Victor Manso and Brian McClure, who play Lieutenants Bradbury and Borges, really really have a great chemistry, and they can really riff off each other. And so we have several scenes where they do that. It's very very fun. And it's funny because originally, those of you who know, I named the Space Command officers off science fiction writers, particularly from the Golden Age, because my thought is that if people hear about that, they might be intrigued to go search out those writers, like Ursula K. Le Guin or Fritz Leiber or Ted Sturgeon, the great Theodore Sturgeon, who was a dear friend of mine. And so originally, Borges was going to be called Murray Leinster, and and that was a very famous science fiction writer whose actual name, oddly enough, was Will Jenkins, and he chose Murray Leinster as his pseudonym. And I've wondered if that was because so many science fiction writers and editors were Jewish, if he was trying to, like, fit in, Better Call Saul, where Jimmy becomes Saul, to appeal more. But Murray Leinster. But then I met Victor Manso, and he was wonderful. He's from Venezuela, speaks Spanish, of course, and he didn't look like a Murray Leinster to me. So I was thinking, well, what's a fantasy or science fiction writer who was Latino? And that's very hard to find, particularly from that era. And then I remember the great fantasist Jorge Luis Borges, and so he's named Jorge Borges after the great writer. And if you've never read Borges, search him out. He's terrific. And but then I still had Murray Leinster. So when I had our wonderful editor Dave Edison play a role in Space Command Forgiveness, I gave him that name. So there he is as Murray Leinster, and he definitely looks more like Murray Leinster than Victor Manso does. So let's see, what other questions do we have? I'm getting a little behind. Mountains of Elysium says, is there any character you have changed because of a different take by an actor? Well, I was just mentioning Borges was one. Let me think. Well, yes, Sarah Marafino. Originally, we had the worldwide talent search, and the idea was that anyone could audition anywhere in the world. They could download the audition scenes and audition for two of the leads in Space Command. One was Captain Kemmer, who was a male role, and the other was Cadet Bradbury, who was male or female. And so we got 7,000 inquiries, 1,200 videos, winnowed it down, and then had callbacks for about 40 of them. And that's how we ended up casting about 9 actors from those readings. But of the auditions for Captain Kemmer, all of them were male except one female. There was one woman, an actress, who had the audacity to audition for Captain Kemmer, and that was Sarah Marafino. And I thought that was really wonderful. I very much applaud people who color outside the lines and do it well. And so I liked her, and so I had her come in for a callback, and I decided to create Captain Essex, because Miss Sarah had auditioned for Captain Kemmer, and I really liked her, and I thought she was great. And so I said, okay, let's have her. Let's create Captain Essex, and she's in the Templar, a companionship to Paladin. And created that role and wrote that whole role just because she had the I was going to say the balls to audition for Captain Kemmer, and so that was great, and it worked out really wonderfully. And we've had a lot of mileage on that character and her interactions with Jack, and so forth. Let's see, what else? Hello, beautiful people. Hello, Galenda. Good to see you. It's good to see you, and thanks for joining us today. And again, just a reminder to those who came in a little late. We've got a Kickstarter campaign going. It's starting off a little slow. It's at 12 grand. We've got to be at like 20 in order to make 60 by the end of our campaign. We've only got 3 more weeks after this. And so if anyone's been wanting to pledge to Space Command or wants to buy Space Command share, then we can fold it into the campaign, and you'll get all the perks that would come attendant with that. It would be very helpful, because if we can hit 20 grand by like today, or tomorrow at the latest, then I think we have a good chance of snagging the 60 grand. Otherwise, we lose it all. And because it's being put toward post production on Forgiveness, it just slows our ability to finish it and get it to all of you. So please spread the word. And if you have any maiden aunts who are about to give you an endowment or whatever, remember your friends. And and of course, you're all welcome to come visit the Space Command set if you're in LA and want to see something cool. And so that's some of the stuff. And please ask any questions you want to ask. I can continue talking and telling you about some of these cool things behind me. Let's see what else is over here. Well, here's Captain Kirk in the Tholian Webb spacesuit, which was a wonderful episode of Star Trek, their 3rd season, where they introduced these spacesuits. And they made them life size. And unfortunately, the actors, they didn't have a zipper. And so the actors, if they had to go to the restroom, it was a big McGill to get them in and out of the suits. And they ran late in shooting, and it was but it's still a wonderful episode, the Tholian Web. And so when we did the Star Trek episode with Sulu for Star Trek New Voyages, World Enough and Time, which you can see on this on Mr. Sci-Fi on the landing page, and I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. We used those. We made a replica of those Tholian Web spacesuits, and I still have one, which I love, love, love. The reason I love it is William Ware Tice was the costume designer on Star Trek, the original Star Trek, and he was a genius. And he created costumes that had never been seen before anywhere on any TV show, and very imaginative. Sometimes you'd have a clunker, but generally they were terrific. And he came up with a spacesuit. And what's wonderful about this design is that it wasn't like any other spacesuit design ever. And it's very difficult to come up with something original, something that you haven't seen before. Most people kind of do things that are kind of like a little tweak here and there, but not something really imaginative. And that's why I, for instance, love those spacesuits from Alien. That's one of my favorite spacesuits because they were so different. They were designed by um, Mobius, the great French artist, and again, totally unlike anything that had come before. They're based on sort of Japanese armor and all sorts of stuff, and really, really marvelous. So let's see what else we have here. Any other questions, guys? I can keep going, and we can, enjoy our time together. I'll be doing these live casts every other day or so throughout the campaign because what I'm trying to do is, see if we can goose those numbers on Kickstarter. And by the way, if in terms of buying Space Command shares, it's very easy. You just email me at markzicree@gmail.com. Remember, it's MARC, and I will send you like paperwork, sign one page thing, and include the payment, and bang, you're good to go. And that involves you're invited to the set when we're shooting. We often put you in the show as an alien or as a some put you in a spacesuit, whatever. And you're welcome to all the parties, all the events, and at Comic Con, other conventions, we take you out to a meal and get into the convention. It's a pretty good deal. I mean, if I weren't me, I would be buying a Space Command share because I would want to be part of that party. So, and let's see. Ann Daly says Leinster is a province in Ireland with 12 counties in it. It sounds funny how you pronounce it, but I like it, and so will anyone from Ireland. That's great. That's great. Yes, and but it's interesting because Murray Leinster is the reason that Stephen King became a writer because he was like a teenager or something, and he was reading a book by Murray Leinster, and he thought it was a piece of shit, and so he threw it against the wall and said, "I can do better than that myself," and he started writing. So, but during his era, Murray Leinster was very, very, very prolific and did a lot of novels and short stories and novelizations and you just very, very see the thing about science fiction writers in the 40s and 50s and 60s was that they were paid so badly, a penny a word, 5 cents a word, that they had to keep writing at an enormous speed to be able to make any kind of living, even of impoverished living. And a few broke through: Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, but most of them were just working their asses off. And in fact, L. Ron Hubbard, who was a science fiction, fantasy, and horror writer before he became the head of Scientology, he would write on these big rolls of paper, so he wouldn't even have to put another piece of paper in. He would just type, 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 type. And that was the name of the game back then. In the early days, you might have a few hundred science fiction writers, at most probably fewer, and the science fiction fandom might be only a few thousand. So it was very different from how it is now. Uh, yeah, there we go. Yeah. They're talking about Ireland and Leinster, and that's fun. That's very fun. And by the way, this ID card is a multi-pass, and of course that's from Fifth Element, and so I've used that as a little nod to one of my favorite movies, and it's great, and so I've done one for me. This is Captain Bob Heinlein, and so forth. Many of our actors have their little multi passes, so really fun. But let's see. What else would you like to know? I can keep going. Let's see. Well, this is a Buck Rogers toy from the 30s. There we go. Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon were two very popular science fiction newspaper strips, and they spun off into movies and TV shows and all sorts of stuff. But Ray Bradbury was collecting Buck Rogers newspaper strips, when he was a kid, and it meant a lot to him. Wow, there's a lot of people from Ireland. That's great. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And I've been to Ireland, and I love it. It's a wonderful place, and so glad that it exists. Hi, Mark. Joseph says, I like the Quark thumbnail you use, so I will ask Quark question. What's to stop him from replicating an unlimited number of latinum bars to gain unlimited wealth? It's a good question. My guess would be that just as they have counterfeiting laws here, against just kind of, running dollar bills on your printer. They would probably install protocols on replicators that would stop people from, replicating gold or, things like that, so that the currencies wouldn't crash. But that's just a guess, and I mean, when I first went on set, Armin gave me a signed bar of Latinum, which I've got somewhere around here. And he's such a dear soul, and I'm so glad that he and I became friends. And it was such an honor. And we've written a role for him in Space Command that you'll be seeing very soon. He had a one scene in Ripple Effect as the character, but he's essentially playing Bob Picardo's grandson, because we're jumping, back and forth between different generations in Space Command. It covers 200 years, and so really, really fun to be able to have Armin as part of our universe. But I think the design of Quark was terrific, and it's fascinating when you look at racial stereotypes in Star Trek, because there are. I mean, Roddenberry was an old school guy, and one can say, okay, well, he had, that you can see, Quark and the others of his race as a Jewish stereotype, and and then of course Lucas had the stereotyping in the first three Star Wars, the early the prequels, But again, you can really, if you decide you're going to be offended by stuff, you'll be offended all day long, because you can either see the positive or the negative, and I think that Quark is such a wonderful character, and so much fun to write for Armin. Yeah, you just let it go. And I mean, I once made the point that on the original Star Trek, they talk about how racially open it was, and groundbreaking, and it was. But when you think about it, essentially, it's a starship with uh, an Asian chauffeur and a black switchboard operator. And I mean, if you're really going to reduce it to its most simple components, and thank God that they and I were able to expand those roles and give them depth and meaning. But it was really great when they did Star Trek: The Next Generation, and instead of the other races being merely kind of supporting players who only would have maybe a moment or two, they actually had full storylines devoted to Geordi and Worf and so forth. And Star Trek did open up to where it became much more groundbreaking, and with Cisco as the captain and all of that, really, really great. Um, but the talent pool on Star Trek has always been first rate. I mean, there's just so many great actors on Star Trek, and so many that I'm eager to work with and have worked with. It's just it's a blessing. Yeah, Joseph says the economy in the Federation always seems a bit ambiguous. Yeah, well, credits. Science fiction long ago came up with the notion of credits, because they were just developing credit cards, and in the 50s, and so a lot of the science fiction writers were extrapolating that money would become outdated, and you'd have credit. And now we're sort of almost to that point because of the pandemic. People stopped using currency, and now it's most people are paying with their phones, etc. So it's a science. We live in a very science fiction world now, and so that's why I think a lot of science fiction nowadays is kind of like turned inward and not very cutting edge the way it was when I was growing up and reading it. It was a fascinating time to grow up reading science fiction during the space race, because the headlines about missions to the moon and so forth were so in alignment with science fiction I was reading by Ray Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke and all those guys, and it felt very much like we would be achieving the visions that they had in their books. And 2001, I've said before, was like a postcard of the future we were going to get. We assumed that we would get there, and and for all of us in science fiction, it's extremely frustrating that the manned space missions ended. Werner von Braun wanted us to go to Mars, and he had a whole plan for it. Let's see if I have that book here. I just saw it a little while ago. Anyway, he wrote. Oh, is it that way? No, it's somewhere in here. Von Braun, but he resigned NASA after the moon landing because they chose the space shuttle program instead of the Mars program, and it would have been a very, and well, the For All Mankind, the Ron Moore series is very much about what would have happened if we had pursued the other path. So it's great. So so anyway, what else can I tell you about? It's really fun to be doing Space Command. I love it. I keep coming up with ideas. It's not, Elaine and I are just batting stuff around, and it's really fun because when you come up with an idea for a show like this, you have ideas, you have notions of where you're going, but you're always being informed by new things that pop up. And you'll say, oh, well, wait a minute, here's something cool. And you don't want to overthrow your story or wreck it, but it can enrich it. And that's really great. And because we have standing sets, we can do reshoots if we need to. We can do redesigns of characters. We can do anything we want. It's an enormous freedom, but it does cost money. And again, please throw some money our way via Kickstarter and buying Space Command shares, because that's how we get to the finish line, guys. And the larger vision, for those who don't know, I've created something called the Showrunners Network, and that's a slate of 6 series that I'm creating with the creators of Farscape and Defiance and Alienation and Sequest and The Expanse and on and on and on. And it is phenomenal. And those scripts are all written; they're all waiting in the wings. We have amazing actors who we've cast already: Gates McFadden, Veronica Cartwright, Robert Picardo's in another one of our shows that we're going to be doing. Barbara Bain, for God's sake! It's just we just cannot wait to get this stuff where we can share it with you guys. Let's see. Mountains of Elysium says, I love that science and science fiction can be a perpetual motion machine, one inspiring the other, then that innovation pushing more boundaries we never thought possible. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I refer to my phone as my tricorder, and it is. But it's really marvelous and magical. I mean, the fact that we can talk to anyone anywhere in the world, the fact that we can see them on a video phone, the fact that we can, it used to be if you'd said something like, well, where's the name Aardvark come from? You'd have to really go to an encyclopedia. You'd have to pull out a big volume, or it was a torturous process. And now you just ask Google, and there it is. And that's really pretty cool. And in terms of AI, we didn't get to HAL 9000 by 2001, but we're absolutely going to get to HAL within the next year or two if we aren't already there. And it's really amazing. And it's funny because there's so many things wrong with the world, so many terrible things happening, and I came up with a word that no one had ever coined before, and I did a Mr. Sci-Fi about it, because people talk about dystopias and people talk about utopias. Those are the two ends of the spectrum in science fiction projection. But I think what we're living in always is a dysutopia, which is a mix of a dystopia and a utopia. So on the one hand, we have the internet and Google and wall screen televisions and instantaneous phone calls and all this amazing stuff. And then we also have the terrible things going on in Israel and Palestine and Ukraine, and so and the global climate change, which is terrible, and so it's always a mix of bad and good, and I think once you say to yourself, okay, that's just what the world is, and there's great things and there's terrible things, and you try and stand against the terrible things and do what you can, and you try to value the wonderful things and be present in the moment, and value your life and have joy in it. So that's and that's also what I try to write. So it's not it's hopeful what I'm writing, but it's not easy solutions. It's not it still has hatred and violence and anger and trauma and all of those things that we're never going to get rid of, but we can try to be on the right side of the equation. Let's see. Fleet Admiral Levy says, I think William Gibson said that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. That's true, and that's great. And again, if you haven't checked Alien 3, his version of it, on Mr. Sci-Fi, please check it out, because it's wonderful and it is well worth watching. Let's see. I watched a series called Masters of Science Fiction, narrated by Stephen Hawking. My favorite is Ellison's The Discarded. Do you have any insight on how he felt about the interpretation? Well, he's in it. Harlan plays a role in it. It was shortlisted for the Nebula. I think he was happy with it. So Tet says, loved your movie, loved your show too, and toys, laughing out loud. Yes, so you can finally get a figurine of Captain Jack Kemmer, and a figurine of me, and in silver, gold, bronze color. They are not made of metal, but you can get them, and you can dress me up in any Barbie or GI Joe clothes you like, and I will not say boo, but thanks for the kind words. We're very proud of what we're doing with Space Command. With everything we do, we always bring our A game, whether it's writing Smurfs or DS9 or any of these things. I mean, the lovely thing is when you bring your A game to everything, you can be proud of what you did, and you don't always hit a home run, Sometimes it might be a single or a double, depending on the day. But you can always say, "Well, I did the best I could, and I brought my full heart and my full skill to this thing." And that's I'm very proud of that, and that's something I learned from people like Harlan and Ted Sturgeon, and all of my mentors, Serling and so forth. None of them were just saying, "Okay, well, good enough is good enough. Good enough is never good enough," and I feel that very, very strongly. So I'm always pushing to do more and better, and learning as I go. So it's but science fiction is so much fun because you not only get to tell a meaningful story and a timeless story in its way because it lasts over the decades in a way that modern day drama doesn't. Not that there's anything wrong with modern day drama, God knows, but you can watch something like Aliens or something like, John Carpenter's The Thing, and they feel very, very current, and or Twilight Zone or Outer Limits or the original Star Trek or Next Gen or any of these things that we love. But but the other part that's fun about science fiction is you can have all these wonderful toys, spaceships and aliens and robots and androids, and it's very, very cool, and I love that. So, and I'm part of a tradition. I'm part of a tradition of wonderful work that goes back all the way to H.G. Wells. One can even go back prior to that. One could even go back to Frankenstein. Some people think of that as the first science fiction novel. People have always argued about what's the first science fiction novel. Some people even go back to the ancients, but I think Frankenstein works as a story in which technology is the driving force of the story. And so, and Daly says John Delancey was amazing as Q. His character in Star Trek was so credible. Yeah, he's another one on my short list of people I want to work with. And it's just a matter of finding roles and getting to it. It's one always has to make sure that one is giving someone a role worth doing. You have to find the meat of it, and I often write roles for specific actors. I've done that always, and it's very, very gratifying. Or sometimes you cast the actor and you don't know who they're going to be, and that's also a surprise and really fun as well. So now just to let everyone know, I'm going to be talking till 1 my time, and so if your friends want to ask questions, if you want to alert people that I'm on the air, live on the air, and if there's any of the shows I've written for that you'd like to know how I came to write a given story or a given script, I will try my best to remember. And but it's so cool to if you go through my files, there's all the stuff on the Twilight Zone and all the stuff on the animation I wrote and all the stuff on the live action I wrote. The manuscript of the Twilight Zone companion is like this big. It's like 1,000 pages, and I had to retype that because at one point I had to restructure the book, and that was all like cut and paste. But it was literally, you cut this piece out and tape it down to this page and type this other part in, and old school, man. It was before I wrote the Twilight Zone companion before computers, and that was definitely memorable. I wrote it on an IBM Selectric, which I wish I still had, and I wish I had my original K Pro 2 as well because that's the first computer I started on, and it was. I was going to say it was a beast. It wasn't. It was like easier to transport than some computers, but it was not, nothing compared to what we have nowadays. It was a you had to learn to work it, and it took like 4 discs, 5-inch floppies for a single script, and so forth. So, and there was that horrible fanfold paper that you had to tear those little holes off of. Not fun, not fun. So, but let's see if there's anything else interesting here. This is pretty cool. This is my mug of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and this was sculpted by a friend of mine named Jim Rumpf, and he died young, sadly, but he was an incredibly talented sculptor, and he did a lot of sort of fan-based stuff, some originals, and some he did the Spock and Kirk from Wrath of Khan mugs, and he did the Star Wars mugs, and just incredible guy. And went to his workshop a number of times and got to see him making these things. I have a King Kong mug over there that he did that's spectacular, and a science fiction fan mug that's really, really delightful. I might put those on exhibit here in Mr. Sci-Fi. I kind of switch it up periodically. I'll change the books that are on exhibit. I'll change the figures just so you can be entertained by what's behind me. So let's see. Ann Daly says, I've seen Ethan McDowell in another short movie, and I can see how he made it into your cast. Well, yeah, Ethan's great. He's not only wonderful to work with. I was looking for an actor who would have sort of that decency like a Jimmy Stewart or a Henry Fonda, those kind of old school heroes where it's not corny, but it's genuine. It's decency and honesty and heroism. Ed Kemmer had that on the original Space Patrol because he'd been a hero in World War II, flying P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Mustangs, P-38 Mustangs. But yeah, Ethan's from Wyoming, and he's got that cowboy quality. He's a really nice guy, and so I've never ever regretted that decision. He was unknown when we cast him, and since then, of course, now he's gone on to be in Doomsday Patrol and Walking Dead and many other things, and he deserves every bit of success that he is given because he is amazing looking for one thing, but also just a great guy and a very talented actor. And wait till you see him in Forgiveness. It's fun because we shot a scene early with him and Frontier at the end of the episode, and he hadn't lived through the scenes yet of the adventure of what happens. And so I thought, why don't we reshoot Ethan's side of those scenes? And so it's actually several years later, but we had Ethan reshoot that scene and a couple of other little bits and pieces at the end, just because he could give it a greater weight of having lived through the experience of the story. And I'm so glad we did. It's just wonderful. He was good in the first version, but he's great in the new version. So again, we'll probably show you. It'll probably be an extra feature on the Blu-ray to show what the original was like and what the new one was like because they're different. And let's see. Peter McCullough says, "Did you see the new Babylon 5 animated movie? If so, what did you think?" I haven't seen it. I bought it, but I haven't gotten around to watching it yet. The part of the problem is I never saw all of Babylon 5. I saw a few episodes here and there, and I wrote for it the first season. But often when I was done working on a show, I wouldn't keep watching it because I was on to other projects. And but I thought what Joe did was really cool. The big novelistic approach. I thought the cast was great. So I'll be interested to see it. I know that he goes to all these different. It's the multiverse again, and I think the multiverse is being sort of overused between Marvel and DC and all these other things. It's sort of like you can do endless riffs on different like imaginary worlds. They used to have imaginary stories in DC where, like, what if Lois Lane and Superman got married? What if Krypton had never blown up? All that stuff, which I loved those stories. But again, it's like it can just be like screwing around until you reach the end. And so, but I'll watch the Babylon 5 movie. I think it's really a shame they didn't greenlight the new Babylon 5 series at the CW when they had the chance. It's because that head of the network is gone now, so that means that that's not probably going to be a thing. But but the great part is that in television you do the work and it stays. So we can watch the work that Joe and I did back, 20, 25 years ago or whatever, and it's the same as when we did it. And I really love that, the eternal quality of it. Let's see. Fleet Admiral Levy says, "Yeah, I bought your Twilight Zone companion and enjoyed the revisit of one of my fave shows. Thanks." And for those who don't know, I've just done the third edition where I added 100 new pages. I added 500 new photographs. There's links to audio and video clips. I mean, it's a big, big difference between the first edition and the third. So if you haven't gotten the third, go to Amazon, order it up. I think you'll really be pleased. The reason I wrote it, the third edition, was for two reasons. One was that all these rarities of Rod Serling giving speeches and all sorts of stuff that had been impossible to see. When I wrote the book, you'd have to go to university and put it on a moviola and see it, was now online. And so I wanted to be able to share those links with the fans. And then also, after I wrote the book, people kept telling me stories about the Twilight Zone, about Rod Serling, and all sorts of things that weren't in the book. And I thought, well, Jesus, why didn't you tell me that when I was writing the book? And so I wanted to put that stuff in as well because it was really some very meaningful stories. So yeah, but I'm very proud of the Twilight Zone companion. I'm very glad I wrote it. Every now and then I think to myself, I wrote a book about the Twilight Zone, really? But and it was a hard, long project. From the month I started to the month it came out was 5 years. It was rejected by 25 publishers over a 2-year period. Elaine said, "Just keep going," and I did, thank God. And finally, it sold to a publisher that had rejected it. and that was miraculous. But we changed agents, and the new agent was young and hungry and knew how to, sell a book. Thank God, and I'm really, really glad of that. So, and it's been a wonderful thing to be the world's expert on something of quality. And if you ever want to hear me talk for 30 hours, get the Twilight Zone Blu-ray. I produced that and did 52 commentaries on it with many of the luminaries who both made the Twilight Zone and were influenced by it. So very, very fun. So let's see. Mountains of Elysium says, I wish many multiverse stories were different perspectives on the same event. So many people tell wildly different tales of the same event. If you read that a few generations later, which is true. Yes, there's a great Akira Kurosawa movie called Rashomon, a Japanese film that's the different stories coming off of a rape, and the different versions people tell that are completely different. And yes, and when you write nonfiction, like when wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, you start to see that sometimes there are things that are obviously legitimately true. For instance, when the Purple Testament was airing, the director and the actor who starred in it were in a plane crash, and they were swimming for their lives with broken limbs and so forth. And that actually happened. They pulled that episode the night it was supposed to air, just because they didn't know if these people were alive or dead. And in fact, that episode is about a soldier who can see the look of death, coming death, on the face of the other soldiers. And at one point, the director was swimming with the actor trying to get to shore, 5 miles to shore. The pilot had been killed in the crash. And the director said to the actor, "Don't look at me," because he didn't want him to see the look of death on his face. So that was Richard Albert, and so that was objectively real, and you could just report the story. But sometimes one person would tell one story of how something came about, and another person would tell another story of how it came about, and they'd be completely different and opposite. And in some cases, I would say, well, these are the two accounts. Or in some cases, I'd say, well, this one's the one that I think is the reality. And you just have to kind of do the best you can in that regard. But that's the challenge with every historian, because again, there is no objective history in that way. There are certain large events that are objectively true, quote unquote, but then it becomes interpretation. So yeah, then let's see. Uh, Tets says, have been watching sci-fi last 45 years, but never read books. Sadly, well, it's not too late to start. There are many audiobooks. When I was a kid and a young adult, I longed for a lot of the books I'd read or wanted to read to be on audio, and they weren't. I've always loved audiobooks, and now they basically all of them are. So you can go on Audible and have monthly membership, or there's LibriVox, which has things that have come out of copyright, LibriVox.org. There's a number of different sites. In fact, there's even one site where you can, let's see if I can find it here, where you can actually, if you have a library card, you can go and rent on your phone audiobooks for free. And that's called, let's see if I have it here. What's the name of it? What's the name of it? Let me see if I can find it. I'm not finding what's it called? I'll find it. Hang on, guys. Libby. It's called Libby, Libby, and I highly recommend it. It's really terrific. Fleet Admiral Levy says, I'm definitely more interested in alternate histories rather than the multiverse idea. I think the multiverse may be what hastens superhero fatigue, then staves it off. Yes, I agree. Problem I have with superhero movies is they die, then they cast another actor, and then they're back again. It's like, there's no stakes that last in these comic book movies, and that gets rather tedious. Whereas in a movie, they die and they're dead, and in science fiction you can bring them back, but that's not always what happens. Whereas with superhero movies, it's always what happens. Kimball Cheat says, first sci-fi book someone should read. I would say The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. It's a spectacular book. It's one of my favorites. I've loved it since the first time I read it. It's short. It's only like 90 pages, so it's a good one to start with. I would recommend that. And in terms of alternate histories, of course, many of you know that I was a producer and writer on Sliders, the fourth season, the good season, and that was wonderful because you could basically, first of all, you could have your actors play double roles, and that was really fun to say. Well, what if Quinn in another universe was more irresponsible, and he slid everyone from his world somewhere else and thinks he's the last man on Earth because he emptied his planet and doubled the population of a parallel Earth, and let's go see what happened. It's like, wow, that's fun, really fun. So Fleet Admiral Levy says, I've only recently started getting into audiobooks. I've been listening to old Star Trek novels narrated by Shatner. Yeah. Uh, and Have Space Who Will Travel is a great, great book. I recommend that strongly. I've got it somewhere up here. It's one of my favorites as well. So one of the videos I'm going to do soon is sort of like some of my favorite science fiction books, and I'll just like get a stack of them and say, here, these are ones I think you should read, because there's some that are well known and some not so well known. And here's, like, for instance, here's the first edition of Logan's Run by George Clayton Johnson and William F. Nolan, and it's very, very different from the movie, and it's a great, fun cover, and signed by this one is signed by both Nolan and George Clayton Johnson. But there's a lot of really cool science fiction books. Um, Fleet Admiral Levy says, I love sliders. I'm nostalgic for a specific era of 90s sci-fi. Well, that's when I was writing it. Basically, my writing career started in 1975 and it's still going strong, thank God. And it actually started in 74 when I had a radio play air on KPFK. It was called Lobotomy, and it was a science fiction uh, satire of these two guys who go to a science fiction convention, and it was satirizing science fiction TV shows and movies and authors and books. And it's on Mr. Sci-Fi. If you just type in the word lobotomy in the search column, you'll find it. And I act in it, and I directed it, and I wrote it, and it was really great fun, and I still enjoy it. I still find it fun at this late date. You'll have to form your own opinion, but it's it was really wonderful to record it, and I was in my teens when I did it, and I think it was 17, 18, and it aired on KPFK, which was the big Pacifica outlet here, and then 10 years later it aired again. And by then, of course, 10 years later, I was a successful TV writer, and The Twilight Zone Companion had come out. So pretty amazing decade, quite frankly. And I mean, I look back over my career, and I'm so grateful, because so many people try for a career as writers and they don't make it. And some of them are very, very talented. And there's so many um, factors that have to be in place to get. It isn't just talent that makes a career. It isn't just um, who you know. Because if you can't deliver, it doesn't matter who you know, because they're not going to have you working for them. So let's see. Ted says, have been dreaming the same sci-fi story most of my life. Isn't that strange? Should I try writing it down? Sure, write it down. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there's no harm in trying to write, but it's very good to get feedback from people who are professionals. The Clarion Writers Workshop is the leading science fiction writing workshop in the country. I went when I was 19. I sold my first short story because of it. It was a big, big boost in me getting a career as a writer. So let's see. Claudius Raphael says, off topic halfway, sometimes I wonder if I fantasize. Did John Travolta play in an 80s sci-fi movie? Yes! Kind of like Mad Max mixed with Star Trek Planetary Mission and with a beard. Yes, it is one of the worst movies ever made. It is, what is it called? It's by L. Ron Hubbard, and I am drawing a blank on the name, but I'm sure that one of my friends out there will know the name. It'll come to me, but yeah, he did. And Forrest Whitaker's in it, and I've never seen all of it because I found the beginning of it so terrible. Battlefield Earth, yes! And it's L. Ron Hubbard, and it was a #1 bestseller because all the people in Scientology had to buy it. And I even know people who've read it and love it. It's their favorite book. So maybe it will be my favorite book someday when I'm in the early stages of dementia. I don't know, but we'll see. Fleet Admiral Levy says, I'm definitely trying to break out as a writer. I've been in writing workshops for years. Clarion is the one to go to if you want to do science fiction or fantasy. It's the big one. It's the real one. The problem with many writing workshops is that often they're taught by people who wanted to be writers but failed, or people who don't know what they're talking about, or the other people in the class aren't professional writers. They're just wannabes. And if you really want to, I always say, run with the fast horses. I've always in my career found the most ambitious, most talented people I could pace myself with. Joe Straczynski was certainly one of those. My friend Michael Reeves was one as well, and many of the other writers I've known. I went to Clarion. The students included Kim Stanley Robinson and Robert Crace, who became a big mystery writer, and they were kids. They were in their 20s. I was a teenager, and it's but Clarion. Anyone who wants a career in science fiction, Clarion is absolutely the way to go, and it really sets you up really well. Let's see. We have just about 6 more minutes here. I really wasn't sure if it was a fever dream. Thanks. You're very welcome. I mean, it's funny because, yeah, there's some movies where I go. When I was a kid, there was this movie about these boys in New York who go to the American Natural History Museum and they find a canoe and they start down this river. And the further down the river they go, the further into the past they go, and they see woolly mammoths and dinosaurs. And it was shown in half-hour installments, or maybe even 15-minute installments, over a number of days. And as I grew up, I was the only person who I'd ever met who had seen it. And I really began to wonder if I had dreamed it. And then finally I found out what it was. It's a film by the great Czech animator, stop motion animator Carl Zeman, and it's called Journey to the Beginning of Time. And it's a wonderful, wonderful film. And actually, there's the original version, which doesn't have the boys in New York. That was filmed as a wraparound, and they just matched the clothes of the kids in the movie and dubbed it into English. But whether you watch the English version or the Czech version, which are very different from each other, it's a great, great, great fun time. I really, really love it. Uh, let's see. Galinda says, even if you only write for yourself, writing is therapeutic. Yes, that's true. Uh, Fleet Admiral Levy says, I've been considering the MFA at UC San Diego because I believe they have a strong connection to the sci-fi community, but I don't know how true that is. Before you get into an MFA program, I mean, you can, and it may work very well, but the two things I would suggest you do if you want a career in science fiction is check out Clarion. There's a Clarion West and a Clarion East. It's a 6-week course. You live there, and it's at a university, and each week a different famous science fiction writer comes and teaches you. My teachers were Roger Zelazny, Gene Wolfe, Damon Knight, Kate Wilhelm, Samuel R. Delaney, and Joe Haldeman. I mean, that's like, that's all stars. I mean, really major science fiction writers. And Damon was editing an anthology at the time, and he read one of my short stories that I'd written in my first English class at UCLA called Leader of the Club, and he bought it. And the fact that someone was willing to pay $50 to buy a short story of mine convinced me that I might make a go of it as a professional writer. So I would do that, and I would also subscribe to Locus, which is the trade journal of the science fiction book industry. And it will be invaluable. And go to science fiction conventions. The two that are oriented toward writers are the World Science Fiction Convention and the World Fantasy Con, and they include science fiction, fantasy, everything. And all the major writers go there, including George R. R. Martin. And you can hang out with the writers and the agents and the editors, and you can get to know them. And I promise you, it will give you a huge advantage because you do not want to be on the slush pile. It's too hard to break through. Let's see what else. Dane says, have you ever seen the movie Akira? Really cool sci-fi movie. I highly suggest it. I haven't seen it yet, and it is a hole in my knowledge, so I will definitely check it out. I saw the original Ghost in the Shell, which I very much liked, and the animated one, not the live action movie, which was not good. So let's see. Mountains of Elysium says, I always wanted to write, but have procrastinated for a long time. To actually get going, should I start with short stories rather than dive into a novel? Yes, but what I would again say is surround yourself with professionals. Surround yourself with people who are doing it for a living, because it's a very different vibe, and they'll help you. It's interesting. Hollywood is a very rough, very caustic world, and there are a lot of arrogant jerks in Hollywood. Not all, thank God, but a lot. And books are very different. Books, it's a community, and people are supportive of each other. And you can go to WorldCon, the World Science Fiction Convention, or you can go to FantasyCon, and World Fantasy Con, and you'll meet writers, and they'll say, "Oh, let me take a look at your short story. Let me give you some advice." You really need those people to guide you and to shape you, because you don't want to write a novel not knowing what you're doing. It's interesting. I had lunch some years ago with Brandon Sanderson, just when his career was really taking off. And there was a Kevin J. Anderson did a weekend class called Millionaire Writers of Science Fiction or something. And I was on the panel to represent movies and TV, and Brandon Sanderson was on the panel. So I took him to lunch, and he told me that he wrote something like 12 or 14 novels before he ever sold one. And I said, what was different? What changed where you were able to sell them? Because by then he was selling everything he wrote. He would write one adult novel and one YA novel per year. And he said, I started going to conventions and getting known and getting my work out there. He said, because previously he would just kind of send it off, and hope for the best. And of course, because no one knew him, he was just like among the many, and was getting enormous rejection. Now, was that because the books weren't good enough? No, it was because he wasn't known. and he wasn't in that world, and that's what you have to do. It's really vital. And in terms of starting late, the great part is when you pick up a book, you don't know the age of the person who wrote it. They could be 19 or 16, or they could be 92. Someone like Jack Williamson was writing from when he was a young man to when he was like an incredibly old man. So novelists can have a very, very, very long career. Ageism does not affect novelists generally. They if they have a fan following, if they've got a base of people who will buy their work, they can keep writing until they drop. So let's see. Let's see. Here we go. But yeah, but in terms of writing a novel, that's a big thing to take on, and don't do it without someone, a professional, giving you feedback and guidance. It's just you don't want to invest that much time and effort. Let's see. And also in science fiction, which is one of the few genres that still has that, short stories can still make a career. You can, like for instance, Murderbot was originally, a short story or a novella, and it put her on the map, really, Martha Wells. And science fiction short stories can still win Nebulas, Hugo Awards. I mean, they're read. They're read. Let's see. Tet says, love Battlefield Earth, especially the part where they trust humans with special machines. Think this happens in our ancient past. Was the movie a hint? Laughing out loud. I see. Here's the wonderful thing about me. I don't need people to love what I love and hate what I hate. If I hate Battlefield Earth and other people love it, that's fine, because I don't need people to, share my brain. My brain is my brain. Your brain is your brain, hopefully. But it's fine. I love the fact that movies and TV shows and books are a collaboration between the audience and the creator, so that wherever you are in your life, all the things you've lived through, all the things you've experienced, all the things you've seen and read and heard, that the moment you encounter that book or that TV show, it is informed by that journey. And so no one is really seeing the same movie, the same book, the same TV show. They are all in a dance between the totality of their life and the art form. So that's my take on it. Let's see. Okay, what else? Thanks. Don't worry about getting my name wrong. I'm called Asylum by another YouTuber, and it's now a running joke on his channel. That's fun. And then Clarence Wiles says, I'm going through Dune as of now, the book. Yeah, the book is really good. And I really enjoyed it. And I've read it several times. I like the movies, the recent movies, but I also on Mr. Sci-Fi I had a link to, they've restored David Lynch's Dune. A fan did it, and they put in all the scenes that were cut out, and it is so much better. I really like David Lynch's version now. It has its flaws, God knows, but it has enormous strengths as well. The casting is terrific, and the visual design is phenomenal. If just go on to David Lynch's Complete Dune 4K, you should be able to find it. It was edited by a fan named Spice Diver, and I highly, highly recommend it. You can watch it on YouTube. So we've reached an hour of me talking with you guys, and I really enjoyed it. Please go and pledge to the Kickstarter campaign. If you want to buy Space Command shares, please do. We really, really need the money now to finish what we're doing. And the sooner we finish, the sooner we can start generating money for our investors. So yeah, and so you can email me at markzickery@gmail.com to buy shares, $7,500 each, and lots of perks come with it. And or you can go on the Space Command Kickstarter campaign, which I'll list, below, and throw some money our way. If we can hit 20 grand in the next day or so, then we have a hope of hitting 60 grand by the end. And boy, I don't want to lose that money. I don't want it to vanish in a moment. So we have succeeded at all of our Kickstarter campaigns, and I want to continue that. I'll answer the final question. I came in late, so forgive if this was answered. I do have some teasers for future episodes of Lost Movies Dramas you will snuggle on yet. Yes, we do have teasers and trailer. We have trailers for coming episodes of Space Command. You can see bits and pieces of them in the Kickstarter video that's on our campaign. We've posted them here. If you just kind of type in trailers, you might find them. And soon we'll do some trailers for some of the other shows we're going to be making as well. So that'll be a lot of fun. So thank you all. It's lovely spending this time with you. I'll be doing this every other day or so throughout the length of the campaign, and I really appreciate all of you. One of my favorite things about this journey is the wonderful people I've gotten to know. So we'll talk again soon. Take care. Bye, guys.